Welcome back, everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about the science of glaciers and climate change and how that all relates together. And we're still talking to Melanie. Melanie, can you tell us a bit about what you were trying to accomplish in the field with your drone?
Yes, I think that's, of course. I think that was the main motivation. So it's hard to put into few words, but it might be possible. So I'll give it a try.
Use a bit more than a few.
So I knew that there are plenty of rock glaciers in Argentina, in the dry Andes, that is supported by literature that is available. I also knew that rock glacier kinematics is the understanding of the vertical and horizontal surface change. So what you see on the surface, but it's indicative for changes that happen below the surface. And that's why it becomes interesting, because that could involve ice. There's no surface lying on the ice, but there is inside. And it's very hard to grasp it because, of course, you cannot dig holes all over the place trying to identify ice. And so that's why we do it. I knew that rock glacier kinematics are indicative, or at least velocity is indicative. There's plenty of studies that it is indicative of climate, of air temperature changes, to break it down. So, and that, of course, is part of climate change.
Yeah, because the air temperature is one of the many variables we measure.
Yes.
To see if temperatures on Earth change.
Yes.
And therefore how climate change, right?
Yes. Yes. And also officially, so rock glacier velocity is officially an essential climate variable, it's called. So there is documentation on it that it is associated with changes in air temperature. Let's put it that way. And there are studies on rock glacier in the Andes, but there are, in my opinion, too little compared to the huge amount of rock glaciers that you can find in that area. And that has to do with many reasons.
Yeah. So what kind of reasons would you... Is it the remoteness of the
it's a combination. It's part of the remoteness, the accessibility, but also like focus areas of research and access to funding, resources. Not to put it in a wrong picture, but it's not a surprise that a country like Switzerland, and that there are many papers published in that area where research institutes do have money, do have access, and where the mountains are a bit more accessible.
Yeah, fair. Money is usually the issue.
Oh yeah, but it's many more reasons, but there are some that are very apparent, I would say. And so data scarcity and in situ, like measured in place, data scarcity. Yeah. And so I thought I'd set out and do rock glacier kinematics in that area. Also, I had the opportunity to do so because the project I was involved in was focusing on the dry Andes, so it all became a bigger picture. Also, I have great colleagues working, as I said, on the geophysics and the hydrological measurements. So it's sort of playing a puzzle together. They can find out other things. I can contribute with photogrammetry, like with satellite imagery, with drone imagery. And then we can have a look from the bird's perspective, but also below the ground, for instance. So that's a cool thing. So it was the project that was very interesting, of course, and also the motivation to do research there. And now I lost track of your question, Tika. Sorry. I already realized when trying to explain in more detail or less detail that I will stray off your question.
No, it's okay. It's your story, and I'm just helping you tell it, right? So if you're talking, it's perfect. So I'm just trying to string it back together to a question. You went there, you did some measurements. So what was the outcome of your research? Because you measured like the size of the rock glacier, I think.
I did measure the changes that are visible on the surface in vertical and horizontal component. That was the main goal. So I flew with a drone. I took pictures, 2D imagery, like optical, like we see with our eyes. And then there is an approach. It's from photogrammetry. It's a whole field of science in its own. And from the imagery, you can create 3D models. And then you have sort of, I always try to call it, you lie a blanket on a rock glacier surface, but that blanket is not thick. It's very, very thin because you know the actual altitude and location of that surface. So it's like an invisible blanket, let's put it that way. But then you know at a very high resolution, because these images are very high, so for every less than 10 centimeter, you know the exact location in X and Y, and you know the elevation, which is pretty cool, that it's technically feasible. And then you do that for multiple years. That's why I needed to go for the free field seasons, which is cool because then I got to go more often. And you have these elevation models. That's what we call them, digital elevation models. You do some processing and then you can subtract them from each other. And then you know the vertical difference. So you know where the surface gets lower or higher. Higher could be that there's a rock fall on the surface. Lower is often associated with ice melt. And then you have a horizontal component, and that is the one that we talked about before, because that goes into velocity, or that is velocity. And for that you use either the imagery or you create something that is called a hillshade. It's a different visualization, I would say, from the elevation model. And then you do feature tracking.
So also you said when you were explaining me your research in the brief that your glaciers were lazy. And this just stuck with me. Like, can you explain why your glaciers were lazy and what is the implication for, climate, which probably Tika would be very interested in?
I said they're lazy, not because they're not moving, but just because they're not getting faster. So if you're a human being and you run once or twice a week and you're fit, right? You're not lazy, you run, and I think everyone can cheer for that. But if your training goal might be to get faster. That's why I said they're a bit lazy. They do move. One can measure that. So they do move a little less than 1 meter per year on average. In some areas up to 1.7 meters. So there is movement. They're not quiet sitting there on their chair. But they're not getting faster. And that is when tying back to climate change, it was the interesting point. Because one would expect them to become faster because it is getting warmer in that area. It's still cold because it's so high up in the mountains. But it is getting warmer. And that was the interesting part, that the stable rock glacier velocities is implicit of a stable permafrost environment. And that very much contrasts with the glaciers, like the first association, white glaciers, surface ice that is losing volume and changing surface.
That's a super surprising result. What was the first thing you thought about? Like, what, measurements wrong, or I can imagine that would be the first thing you think, right?
Yes. So yeah, first you think I picked the wrong landform. So the study with the drones, with the UAV, was on one specific rock glacier because it's hard to go there to access it. You need to fly, you need to have the right conditions, so you cannot do it on too many rock glaciers. So I thought maybe I just picked one that behaves different than all the others. That was my first association.
But clearly it wasn't, right?
Clearly it wasn't. So we went through all the data. We checked all the data. We checked all the processing. And this processing that I said to get from the imagery to that model is a very long process with plenty of different steps that you can do in different orders. There's different literature on how you do it. It was up to a year, I would say, that we went through that process and optimized it, but always came to the point that there's no increase in velocities. And then when it came very clear, so my motivation was to prove that we can see these changes with satellite imagery, because it's a cool thing. I mean, there are satellites flying around. They do take pictures. So imagery, optical imagery also. So I thought it's a cool thing to try and do that process that I did with the drone imagery, with the UAV imagery, also with the satellite imagery. Of course, they're much further away, the satellites, than the drone. So the resolution is more poor, like you do lose in resolution, but it's
precise, right?
It's less precise, but you can do it on many more rock glaciers because the satellite already took the pictures. So I did it for 58 different rock glaciers, and they were all not accelerating. And then I realized that I didn't pick the wrong one. And then, I think you asked before what was a good moment during my research. And I think when I saw the results of all the rock glaciers, And it got clear to me that we're onto something, also onto something that is different from the European Alps and that is different from what we knew before. That was a cool moment. And it's nice because from that you can learn a lot about the process and you can try and decipher why it is that way.
And why is it that way? Like, because did you try to explain it yourself, or you're just giving this data to other people to make conclusions based on it?
Yeah, no, I tried to explain it. And so one paper was about using this very high resolution UAV drone imagery to try and see if that change correlates with topography, so with slope. The idea would be somewhere where it's very steep, maybe that rock glacier is faster, to see if that is a correlation, and then also to correlate or compare at least it with climate data. That was precipitation, so rain, snow, and air temperature. And we could prove and quantify that movement correlates with topography. It's not a surprise, but it's cool that you can prove it. So yes, indeed, when it's steeper, the rock glacier is a bit faster. But not the steep areas are not the fastest. So there needs to be some other controlling factor. And then we looked into the climate, and we did see that comparing it, as I said before, we have that increase in air temperature and we don't have a response. Maybe we don't have it yet. That's also important to say. So that result is only for that specific location and for that specific point in time. Who knows, maybe in 10 years we do have that response that we now already have in the European Alps. So consistent monitoring is key.
Wow.
But yeah, sorry, you ask why it is that case. And my hypothesis is that it has to do with snow. That might be misleading because we do associate snow with cold temperatures. I mean, when we look outside the window and there's snow, we know it's cold. In fact, snow and snow cover have an insulating factor. So if there is snow cover on the ground and the air temperature gets very, very cold, the snow cover prevents the very cold temperature to penetrate in the ground. So snow can be a ground's down jacket, let's say.
I was thinking because we do have snow in European Alps, so how, and you said that the trend is totally reversed, right? Not what you expected from European Alps. So would that contradict your hypothesis with the snow?
I mean, your conclusion is, you're almost there. The conclusion is, and the important thing to realize is, there's very little snow in that area in the Andes. It is, as I said, it's arid, so there's very little precipitation, so there's very little rain, and there's also very little snow. If there is, compared to the European Alps, there's very, very, very little snow. You would never be able to go skiing in that area. And if there is little snow, it's so windy that it's just all over the place, and it doesn't really stick. And then you have piles of some snow in some areas and a lot of bare surface in other areas. And then that cold winter temperature that is increasing over time, but still it is very cold. So average temperature there is -5 degrees Celsius for the year. So in general, winters can be very cold. And that is able to penetrate in the ground because there's no snow insulating the ground. And in my opinion, that is one of the main factors, because it must be something that's different in the Andes in the dry Andes compared to other mountain ranges. And of course, it can be a delay in the response time so that we're not seeing it yet. But it's nature, so there will be many different factors impacting it. No way, there's only one reason. And one big difference is the snow cover. And from my knowledge and from what I gained and the understanding from my research, I'm saying that the snow cover must have a big impact factor.
Yeah, so to recap your very beautiful story, the thought isn't that the snow is like what you said, the winter jacket, so protect.
It's a down jacket, but I mean, depends which jacket you have in winter.
The big one. So in the Alps, it protected the ground from getting cold, and from a warmer ground, it's easier to melt or make the ice more viscous, so it flows better. Therefore, it moves faster, which is what you measured in the Andes as well, where it doesn't snow, ground is colder, and therefore the flow is slower.
It's not particularly slower, it's just not getting faster. It's consistent.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, other than that, it's a good explanation.
Your hypothesis, right? How would you go about researching if that's true?
We installed 2 cameras that took pictures every single day, so we know about snow cover distribution. There are possibilities to do that from space, of course, but the repetition time, so when is a satellite taking imagery, how do we process it, when do we have access to that imagery. Solar radiation is so high in that area because it's so high up that snow just disappears within hours, and that is not, you're not able to resolve that with satellite imagery. Or not yet, maybe, who knows. So we had 2 cameras, actually wildlife cameras, that did take 1 picture every day, and then we could see snow cover and we could prove that there is very little snow. That data is also published, like all the data is published, not only the papers, but the data is published, because as I said, there's little data, so we want to work against that and make science accessible. It's, to continue if I was able to continue my research now, say money falls from the sky, I could run a next project. Of course, it would be very, very interesting to install more sensors on rock glaciers, to have ground measurements on ground temperature at different depth. So say we have one sensor at 20 centimeter, 40, 60, 80, 1 meter. Wish thinking, 2 or 3 meters. We did install some sensors, but let me tell you, you need to carry up all the equipment to drill that hole to install your sensors. It's a hell lot of work. You need all the people for an entire day. And then I think we managed 130 or so. Which is fine. We hit ice then, so we sort of by coincidence took a little ice probe because we ran through 20 centimeters of ice for some reason. But it is very hard. So, that's of course also why there's so little in situ data. So it's not only you not only need the money, you do also just need the time, the people, the opportunity. But of course that would be nice to have that and then to prove that hypothesis.
That would be cool. Is there a easier way to prove it, like modeling or something that, obviously it's the best if you can actually measure it, but is there some way you can predict it or model this behavior? To
continuously monitor rock glacier kinematics. So that's what I did during my research, to have a very high resolution understanding on the changes of the surface of these rock glaciers vertically and more importantly so horizontally. And to do that in the future, and then to use air temperature, because eventually, of course, air temperature does have an effect on ground temperature. If you cannot get ground temperature, it's much easier to get air temperature or to get an understanding. We did install a station, a weather station, so we do know air temperature in that area. But then if you don't have that, say you want to start new research somewhere, maybe you do have a station operated by someone else close by. So that's much easier. And as I said before, of course, working in the Andes, when you look at Switzerland, you get quite jealous because then you do have this rock glacier monitoring for long periods of time, decades. And then you start giving a talk about your 8 years monitoring, which is the longest for the dry Andes. But of course, you do get questions of how representative that is, and it's representative for that time, but not for more. So of course, there's a large call to continue monitoring or to monitor different sites, even to expand that monitoring. And given that it's so hardly accessible, my conclusion of my research when trying to do that monitoring with satellites, with optical satellite imagery, was that maybe, of course, then we need to give up the resolution to be able to scale it up and to monitor from distance.
I guess it's also much cheaper, right, to use satellite data versus sending people to the Andes?
Yes, of course. Yes. It's much less cool. Fieldwork is really important. We do need validation data. We do need ground data. It's impossible to substitute it with satellite data. My conclusion is just that if you doing it with satellite data, you get results. It's cool results. You can do many great things, impressive things, knowing that satellites are so far away, particularly. But you have to do it in combination with some data measured on the ground that you can validate it, because the Earth is so diverse. As I said, studies are biased geographically, you don't have studies everywhere on Earth, so you do need some field-based studies in the areas to get a feeling on if nature behaves differently at that specific location.
Yeah, and also to get like deeper measurements, I would say. Because with satellites you can see the surface, but you cannot see what actually happens on the ground, in the ground. I think that's way harder to measure if you're not actually there.
There's very fancy things depending on wavelengths. Like if you have specific satellites, you can start penetrating the Earth's surface. The whole other topic is very cool things you can do with different sets of satellites and sensors. But of course, yes, you never have that result that you can get when you're there. But also, of course, when you're there, you can never cover an area that you can do with your satellite. So it's a give and take, and you need to decide for your own research question.
So the combination is key.
That would be my conclusion. There it's very clear that I'm still a geomorphologist and not a remote sensor.
Yeah, but you said you're geomorphologist, but you're also data scientist right now. So let's maybe skew towards it slowly, because I'm curious, how did you decide that it's time to leave Andes and start working in the Federal Research Institute? Was it hard to give up, the field work in the Andes to go to the office environment?
Yes. Of course. It's very hard to give up on these opportunities to go in the mountains. Also, giving up on these opportunities means that you certainly in the future you will lose a bit of touch from the research community that you used to be in, that I really like. And the Rock Glacier community is really cool, a small and very connected research community. It's a cozy one. And that was a hard decision to take. But I think I would have never taken it against, I never decided that I do not want to do mountain research. I never decided that I do not want to do permafrost-related research. It was more checking on the opportunities I do have and also asking myself if university academia is the path I do want to follow. And now I'm trying out something new. As you said, I'm at a federal agency. It's still research. It's not university research. It's much more applied research. And it's a different viewpoint. I do learn many things because I'm entering my new bubble. I still work on ground motion. I still work on now only satellite imagery. Drone imagery at the moment. So the parallel is very strong. It's impressive because PhDs are so niche. I would have never expected that I can use so many things from my PhD for some other work. And the focus is different. Yeah. It's a hard decision, but it's also cool to try something new. And it creates new enthusiasm for a different research topic.
And do you see any very stark difference between academic environment and, let's say, federal environment for research? Is their environment, let's say, less competitive, more teamwork? How does it work?
For me personally, yes, it's much less competitive. It's much more solution-oriented, if one can say that. I think for a PhD, it's human that it creates pressure. In my case, it's never been like a top-down competitiveness. I was never told to be more competitive. We had a very collaborative work environment in the research group. That was a very cool thing. But still, of course, you go to research meetings, you do go to conferences, you start comparing yourself. Maybe you're not reaching a goal that you set yourself or that someone else set. And the pressure gets very high. And it's a systemic pressure for sure. And it doesn't come from, you cannot pin it down to single persons, like to single people. But it is a certain pressure. It is a competitiveness. It can be a competitive or a pressure also that comes from financial burden, because your contracts are usually not that long. Everything becomes very insecure. Personal situation can become insecure. And also you train on being innovative, which is very cool. Like you test boundaries in research. which is fun. But while doing so, you need to set your own boundaries because you can only be as innovative when you're healthy. Yeah, to bring it to that point.
So the work-life balance while you're working for this federal research agency became better or worse?
I mean, now I'm in a transitioning period. So I'm preparing for my defense while working. Certainly, that's no joke. So I cannot tell, really.
Been there, done that. I don't envy you. Like, I was also finishing my PhD while working already, and that was tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I expect there to be a difference, for sure. Just also because I have it out of my head. It's a wild thing to live like 4.5 years reaching for one goal. I think it's very special. It's a very cool opportunity. I mean, who can do that? Very lucky because I still like what I did, and I think that carries me on because I really want to know the answers to those questions. But systematically, I think like one of the biggest challenges is just invisibility because it's so hard to pin down because that's part of invisibility, right? So any meeting that doesn't take place without excuses, any conferences where you present something and no one comes to talk to you about it. Of course, it's systematic. Like maybe that person was very stressed. Maybe that person I mean, we're all living in the same system, right? And I do know the reason, so it's not personal. It's certainly not personal. But if you do it for 4.5 years, of course, you can take it personally. It's very, very hard. You also, I mean, you do lose some energy. And then at some point, I think you start taking it personally. And that can wear you down. And I think that is a system error.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't encourage people to do good research and it doesn't help.
Yeah, it's no joke, and we probably will talk about it eventually because it's a separate topic. It has good and bad sides, like everything, but definitely the system wears you down eventually. So I'm hoping you will be much more fulfilled and less stressed and much more rewarded in the federal agency. Tika, do you have any more questions?
No more questions. I wanted to add that we need to keep in mind that academia is very different from a normal path you would take normally, like a career path. In academia, you are dependent on funding, you're dependent on projects, universities, which means a lot of moving, a lot of stress for asking for grants, and I think we'll dive deeper into that subject sometime later on. But I think for the listeners, it's a important background to know that there is no steadiness or security in academia to be found unless you are very established in your field, I would say. At least that's my grasp of it. That's also why I didn't choose to go into academia, because I prefer the stability.
Yeah, you escaped the madness. Like we recently, because from our group from Uppsala, from our masters, Tika, you are one of the very few ones who just decided to do a second master in science communication. And then just right now you found yourself working for industry. And eventually we start talking that with all the bad and the good and the ugly, maybe for people with your goals, it's better to go into industry, while, I had to learn my lessons through academia, and then I chose industry for very specific reasons that we maybe dive later. But it's totally different worlds. Like I right now I have experience with working for industry for over 1.5 years, and working on my PhD for 5 years, and I can tell you that the systematic differences are very stark. I'm not saying which is better, which is worse, because all of them have bad and good sides, but for my mental stability, let's say, academia became very exhausting towards the end of it. And I think it's kind of normal to be exhausted towards the end of your PhD, because in the end you did work on one specific task for 4.5 years, 5 years, 3 years, however long your funding goes, which is again a funny topic to talk about, that we don't necessarily even have option to choose how long we would like to work on certain projects. And then of course it's normal to be mentally exhausted toward the end, but the whole systematic pressure, the peer pressure, the publish or perish, so we have to get our data out before others people have their own data out. So you kind of have to be fast, and at the same time you have to deliver very good data. It's much more different compared to where you're working on in industry, where you have your team and the team is striving for the same goal. You still have your research group, but the research group is like more, they have their own research and you're working in the same environment, while if you work in the industry, you have literally your team working for the same project. So I think for listeners who are not familiar, what are the differences between academia and industry, this is a very simple division for now, but we will probably dive deeper when we maybe have a discussion about academia as a career choice, and maybe also a bit about publishing, because I think this is also very interesting. You, Melanie, especially, I recently noticed on LinkedIn, you're very active in the open science, open research community, which maybe we will invite you again. That would be great if you would want to talk about it a bit, because the whole idea that we publish our research in the journals that you have to pay to publish there, and then you have to pay again to even access it. It's it's a bit of a very peculiar situation, and I have strong opinion about that, and I think we should discuss it at some point, but maybe not tonight.
No.
So yeah.
No, but
so
I was just saying that even though it's a harsh environment, even though it's difficult, there are still these amazing people like Melanie just thriving on following their passion and going into all these weird situations, like high up in the Andes with some drone and just doing amazing science. And the fact that we get to read and listen about it, and that people do it even though it comes sometimes at great personal cost is amazing to me, and I really applaud that. And that's,
I think science is awesome. Science is awesome, but it's also like doing science in different environments is also awesome. Academia is not the only way to do science. I think what you're doing right now is still science. It's just different type of environment, which is maybe, better for your personal... Like, I personally love science, and I love my PhD as a research project. I didn't found myself in the academia environment.
Yeah, I would say I haven't decided yet.
That was my next question, because I was like, so you said that you're still like on the edge. Would you go back if you would get, Santa Claus is coming and then he gives you a bunch of money? Would you go back to do your postdoc there?
We are looking for sponsors for Melanie.
No, I really like my new job. I think it's a very cool project. I'm very much looking forward to explore ground motion. Now it's a near linear infrastructure, so it's really cool. I'm very much looking forward to build a new network and to have to see what people are doing in that area and to learn from it and to learn from my new colleagues. That is very cool. But, it's a project, as I said, and that's how things run. And that's not a singularity for university. That projects can be all over the place and all the different sectors. And I, particularly now preparing for the defense, I of course I do see the good sides on the research that I was able to do. So it's a cool thing. I'll just keep it in mind. I'm open for both. And I'll see when the project I'm working in now, and when that ends, when the contract ends, I just see where I'll go and how I will develop now over the next few years and where that will lead me. So it's an open question, really.
So for our listeners, we will probably leave in our episode descriptions all the links for Melanie's paper if you're interested, and all her socials like LinkedIn if you would want to connect with her professionally, if you have questions and you want to follow up with her research or see what she's up to now. From my side, Melanie, thank you, because that was amazing. You took us to places we would not be able to go otherwise. I'm super impressed that within 4.5 years you could produce all of this, this picture from puzzle pieces into these bigger pictures. You found something which was interesting, which was different, which was unexpected. You overcame a lot of struggles and physical and emotional struggles, and it will be amazing to see you graduating, and I wish you everything, whatever you want and whatever you wish in your new career path. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for asking me interesting questions. Always cool to answer.
Yeah, Tika, any last words?
Any final remarks?
Yeah.
I think the moral of the story is do something you really enjoy, however that ends up being. And I think Melanie is a perfect example of this, and I hope we'll see a lot more of you.
Yes, you're a perfect guest. 10 out of 10.
Mission accomplished. Thank you.